Hello everyone, so I'm here today to do my June wrap-up. We're already past half the way in this year and it's crazy. I haven't read that as much as I usually do this month, but let's just go through the stats first as always, and then we will go into the books. So this month I have read 8 books and 2,149 pages. I haven't listened to any audiobooks. And yeah, that's a little bit less than I normally do. I normally do about 100 pages a day. This is less than that, but yeah, it was a busy month. There were a lot of work things going on, so it's what it is. My main moods are reflective, emotional, and challenging, as always, I think. There is a little bit of mysterious there, which is not normally something that appears every time, but yeah, overall it's a pretty average spread for me. In terms of pace, 57% of the books I read are slow, 43% medium, no fast books here. That's also often the case, so no big surprises. 75% of the books I read were less than 300 pages, so I haven't read a lot of very big books, and the rest were between 300 and 499, which to me it's an average book. But yeah, I have read quite a few small books, and I think that is, for some reason, the books that I'm reading for Read Around the World project tend to be small. I don't know why, it's just something that happens, so I think that's why that is reflected here. The spread between fiction and non-fiction is 88% fiction and 13% non-fiction, so I only read one non-fiction book this month, which is less than I normally do, but yeah, again, the Read Around the World project tends to be fiction. Because that's easier to find from a local author. It's easier to find non-fiction from a country, but then it's often not written by people from the country. So that is why non-fiction is rather small right now. When you look at the genres, literary is the biggest one, historical and contemporary, which is normal thing for me. Sociology is there, which normally is not. Young adult is there as well, which normally is not. And mystery is there, which is normally not. So a little bit of a different spread of genres this month. In terms of format, I read 75% of the books I read were print and 25% were digital, which I'm happy with. I'm trying to read more print books, and normally half is where I'm at. But this month I did read a lot more physical books, so that's always good to see. And then in terms of languages, I read 6 books in English and 2 books in French, which again, it's because of the Read Around the World project. I am currently finishing Africa, so a lot of African countries do have French as their language because of colonization, so that makes sense. I probably, going forward with the challenge, there will not be as many French books because Asia didn't have as many French colonies, so that's that. And then if you look at the number of pages each day, you can see at the beginning of the month I barely never reached 100 pages. It was more in the 50 pages per day average, and there were a few days that I barely read anything, and that's definitely because work has been quite crazy. I work in academia, and June, July is when all the students graduate, so there's a lot of work to be done there. So that's just how these cycles go. But at the end of the month, I managed to get a little bit of a hold of it and read a little bit more, which I'm very happy with, and I'm hoping to carry to the next month. So if we look at the books themselves, the first one I read was Coco by Antoine Abel, which is kind of, it's not exactly poetry, but it's very poetic and like very short chapters, that kind of vibe. And it's from the Seychelles, so it's kind of basically just about life in the Seychelles, and it does focus quite a lot in race and like the race struggles between the different people in Seychelles. And it was fine. I didn't think anything particularly good or bad bad about this. I'm glad I read it because I've never read anything from Seychelles, but yeah, it's not one that is going to stay with me for very long. And the next book I read is Afterlives by Abdulrazak Gurnah, and this author has won the Nobel Prize in 2021, and he is from Tanzania. So again, I was reading for the Read Around the World project, and this is a lot about war, and for me, I don't particularly like books about war, but the writing style and the characters were quite compelling, so it reminded me a little bit of At Night All Blood is Black, but I think this was better written than the other one. It didn't need to be as emotionally manipulative or gross or anything to cause an impact. So yeah, I think that this was better. The only thing that I will say is that the pacing for this was off for me. So I enjoyed the first half, and then the second half was all about the word, and I was not interested. And then the last 30 pages or so were good again. So I did not enjoy the reading experience as much as I could have, but I think I would be interested to read something else from the author and see if that's this particular book thing, or is it all his books kind of thing, because I did like aspects of this. The next one I read was Chaka by Thomas Mofolo, and this one was for I think it was Lesotho. Yeah, it was Lesotho. And this one was, it's a classical book. It was written in the early 20th century, and it follows Chaka Zulu, who is a very, I don't know, mythical character. I don't think it was mythical, but like there is this mythical aura around him, and he was a warrior from the Zulus and their fight against other tribes and the fights against the whites, and it does look a lot into colonization and what happened there. And again, I think that this, because it was written like I think 1907, it said in the introduction, if I'm not mistaken, but like early 1900s, and the writing style was very much of the time, and I just found it a little bit tedious to go through. So it was very detached, it was fairly military, it felt like one of those old Russian classics, a little bit like that detachment. So I didn't enjoy it as much as I could have, but I recognize the value in it. Then the next one I read was Eve Out of Her Ruins by Ananda Devi, and I read this for Mauritius. Again, Read Around the World project took control of my reading life this month. But this one is this one I really enjoyed. It was in a multi-perspective kind of aspect, and it's about Eve, which is a girl in Mauritius that kind of loses herself, and there is prostitution in it, there is a lot of drugs and bad things happening, and it did have similarities to me to 10 minutes 38 seconds by Elif Shafak. It had that same kind of vibe, and I really enjoyed it. I think it was very creative and very engaging, and the characters were very interesting to follow. So this one I really enjoyed. Then I read When the Ground is Hard by Malla Nunn, which again, Read Around the World project for Swaziland or Eswatini. And this one, it's a young adult, so it's a little bit younger in tone, and it's a little bit like faster and easier to read, and it goes less deep into things. But basically it's about a school when most of the kids are mixed race, and we follow this girl that used to be popular, but at the beginning of the school year, a new girl comes in that kind of takes her place, and she's relegated to being with the less popular kids. And at the beginning she's really sour about it, and then she meets this other girl that is also part of that not so popular group, and then they do strike a friendship. And yeah, overall it was fun to read. It was a nice break, and I enjoyed my time with it. And yeah, it was nothing like mind-blowing, but at the same time it does look into a lot of societal rules and things in this country, and because in several of these books, because they are in the southern part of Africa, they do have a lot of contact with apartheid South Africa, and so a lot of those kind of societal rules translate, even if it's not governmental intervention, it does translate in the culture. And so in this book we see like how all the color dynamics work, and also for example, the main character, her mom is not married to her dad, so that's another societal thing that might affect her status in school. But money and class is another one, so there's a very complex way of looking at these things. And yeah, we look at all of that, and I think it's interesting to see all those dynamics, especially with race. So yeah, I enjoyed my time with it. I have no qualms with it, other than, I mean, it's not an adult book, but that's not the fault of the book. I think I would have loved to read something like this when I was younger. And the next book I read was Being Mortal by Atul Gawande, and I have made a full review of this, so it will be coming up in my channel soon. But this one is basically about the end of life and what happens when we become old or we become sick and we are not able to take care of ourselves anymore, and who should be taking care of us and how should that happen, and what it's important when we know we don't have long time to live in the earth. And it also goes a little bit into the philosophical sense of the dichotomy of death and life, and how death is a part of life and we should accept that aspect of it more than just like try to isolate ourselves from it. But it was not mostly about that, it was mostly about what happens immediately before death and like the last years of a person, especially when they know that they are going to die soon, relatively soon. And the author is a doctor, so we have the perspective of someone that has seen a lot of death, and they have to also explain it to people. So that was also a very interesting conversation to have, like how doctors feel and what they try to do when they are telling someone that they don't have much time to live in the earth. So yeah, that was interesting. Then the next book I read was Anguille sous roche by Ali Zamir, and this one was another Reader on the World project book that I read for Comoros, and I felt like I read this in French, so again, the things that I get from a book in French are normally a bit less than what I get in English or in Spanish, but this was very beautifully written. I think that the language was very important in this book, and it had a lot of folklore included in it. The main character is very attached sort of to eels, so we have a lot of folklore from the sea, which makes sense because Comoros are islands. But yeah, the story itself, it was not incredibly new to me. It follows a 17-year-old girl at the beginning of her life, and then we follow her through all her struggles through life, and it does look into the culture of the place, of all the people that come and go and all of that, and there were a lot of interesting aspects of it, but I just didn't feel like what was trying to say was like deep enough, or was giving me something incredible that I haven't gotten anywhere else. So yeah, that one was good, but it was not, amazing. And then the last book I finished, this one was for my book club, and it's called Woman Other by Bernadine Evaristo. I have already read this when it first came out and won the Booker, and back then I recognized the craft into the book, and how well written it is, like the the writing is very, it has a flow. It's not a rhythm, and it's not exactly poetry, but it does have that extra oomph. And I recognize that also the first time I read it, but the first time I was so annoyed by some of the characters, because there are so many unlikable characters here. And we read 12 perspectives of mostly black or mixed race characters and mostly women characters. And obviously it's a lot about the oppression and racism, and also a lot of generational trauma and struggles with that, and also personal stories of each of the characters, and how the different characters basically build a life, and they are all interconnected. So at some points it feels like 12 different short stories, but they are all interconnected. And yeah, several of those characters are very unlikable and very, very annoying, and I was not prepared for that the first time, so I didn't like it as much. This time I was prepared, so that affected my reading less, and also because I knew there were all these connections, I was trying to almost like, it's not a mystery, but it was trying to like look at the mystery of how they are all connected, and I was trying to connect the dots all the time, so it was a lot more fun for me the second time round, and a lot more, I could appreciate the book a lot more. So I'm very happy that my book club made me read it the second time, because I think I got a lot more from it the second time round rather than the first time around. So yeah, those are all the books I read on June. Let me know if you have read any of these, what you thought about them. Let me know if you read anything good this month, and until next video, bye!